Guys, BG in the house. This is recorded Thursday evening. Apologies if I'm a bit red in the face. Just come back from a bit of a run. Yesterday on the podcast, we discussed Frank Warren's latest big fight night, which is going to be December the 9th at the Copper Box Arena. I wanted to do a separate video just with a bit more extended thoughts on what this means and some of the things to take out from it, I guess, if that makes sense. First things first, let me just run through the bill so you guys know. 4 fighters announced on the bill, all of them currently scheduled to face opponents TBA to be announced. James Degale at super middleweight, defending his IBF World Super Middleweight title against TBA. Lee Selby, IBF World Featherweight title, he's defending that belt against TBA. Daniel Dubois, 5-0 against TBA. Anthony Yard, 13-0 versus TBA. Now, this is obviously very, very, very noteworthy news. Relatively recently, I don't know, has it been 6 months, 9 months, a year? I don't know, but Frank Warren, Box Nation have started doing business with BT Sports, and it was said at the time that this would be the shot in the arm that outfit needed, and that it would give them the ability to rival, I guess, Matchroom and take on the Eddie Hearn monopoly on the sport. Now, we've had a few fighters leave Eddie Hearn, my bad, and go and sign with Frank Warren. Notably, Josh Warrington, and notably also Tyrone Nurse, although I understand Tyrone Nurse was kind of on like a fight-by-fight type arrangement with Eddie Hearn. Now, with Frank signing James Degale and Lee Selby, he's not only signing 2 world champions, established world champions, but for my money, and I think the general consensus would be, he's signed 2 of the very, very, very best fighters in Britain, in James Degale and Lee Selby. For my money, James Degale still just about, after that draw with Badu Jack, remains as the #1 fighter in his division at super middleweight. Lee Selby, he's in a very, very live division with names like Leo Santa Cruz, Gary Russell Jr., Carl Frampton, those sort of guys up at featherweight. But Lee Selby, clearly a world-class performer, and clearly someone who's mixing at the very, very, very top of his respective division. So, big news for Frank Warren, big news for BT Sports, Box Nation. To have these guys associated with that group really, really does add something. Because as we've discussed in the past, Frank Warren's got a lot of very good fighters. Guys like Leon Woodstock, guys like Zelfa Barrett, guys like Daniel Dubois. Very, very, very good prospects coming through. Perhaps what he maybe doesn't have is the same big headline names that Eddie Hearn has. He's got Billy Joe Saunders, he's got Terry Flanagan, he's got Liam Smith, Liam Williams. Maybe Huey Fury you could throw into the mix, but maybe he's kind of lacking those sort of big world title headline acts. And I guess you could say that Lee Selby, Carl Frampton, James Degale, his recent acquisitions, all maybe could potentially tick that box if handled correctly. So big news, and good to see competition. I'm not one of those boxing fans who's been uber critical of the Matchroom operation. I know the general boxing public love to hate Eddie Hearn and his team, but what I would say is, in all businesses, and including boxing, my belief is that competition is a good thing. And seeing these guys going to Frank Warren is going to mean that Eddie Hearn's going to have to raise his game to keep up, let's put it that way, and to maintain his position in boxing currently. So I think it's a good thing. I'm looking forward to seeing these guys box. And obviously they're going to be out in, 5-6 weeks, early December at the Copper Box. So another big night of boxing for us to look forward to before the year's out. I've actually put down 3 separate points here that I wanted to discuss as to sort of things I take from this announcement. The first is, if we look at Frank's big recent acquisitions, James Degale, Lee Selby, Carl Frampton, I believe all of them left Eddie Hearn's UK operations to go and work in some form or another with Al Heyman and try and make their names and take their fights in the States. Now, the fighters have had some mixed success. Carl Frampton's obviously had some big nights against Leo Santa Cruz, winning 1, losing 1. James Degale's, he's had some big fights. He was paid very well for the Degale fight, as we know. He had a big fight against Badu Jack. Lee Selby, less so. Lee Selby's profile, if I'm honest, has kind of fallen off a cliff somewhat, which is very, very disappointing. And with him being 30 years old, he's going to need to move swiftly to get his profile where it needs to be in order to earn the money he wants from the sport before he calls it a day. What we can say about the three is, whilst they've presumably earned different money and whilst they've presumably enjoyed different degrees of success, none of the three of them have hit superstardom. I would probably say James Degale's profile is actually less than when he was fighting George Groves all those years ago. I would probably say Lee Selby's profile is less than when he beat Gradovitz for the world title belt on a Matchroom show. Bizarrely, even though Carl Frampton has enjoyed huge levels of success internationally, I am not convinced his profile in the UK is actually higher than it was when he beat Scott Quigg. Maybe he's built his name globally. Certainly the Irish community in America will be very, very familiar for him. But, at the time he was fighting Scott Quigg, he was on TV a lot. You've seen him on Sky Sports News a lot. He's making a lot of waves. And certainly his profile hasn't developed into new levels off the back of that Quigg fight. Maybe it hasn't lessened, but there you go. James Degale and Lee Selby are certainly the kind of guys who will want to have been in the big name fights. They'll want to be headlining events, selling out the O2 Arena. They'll want to be on pay-per-view bills. They'll want to be getting some of that pay-per-view money that they see Anthony Joshua earning, Tony Bellew earning, David Hay earning, Kell Brook earning. And maybe they haven't done that with some of their recent fights. So what I'm getting here is, I'm not saying signing with Al Heyman is necessarily a bad thing, but I'm saying right now the UK, for my money, is the market in boxing. Unless your name's Canelo Alvarez, the UK is one of the biggest markets globally for boxing. We're a small country, but we overperform in the sport of boxing. And the public here, despite having a small population comparatively, have shown that they can buy and sell tickets, and so that they can buy pay-per-views at a rate that competes with nations with far bigger populations than the UK. So, whilst Degale and Selby will have gained certain elements from going to work out in the States for a few years, in actual fact, I wonder if when they look back on things and when they reflect on it with a cool head, it would have been better for them to stay in that UK market and to, build towards being UK headline fighters. But here we are. We see them now deciding to come back to the UK market, and we see them now trying something new with Frank Warren and BT Sports. So fair play to them for doing that. I just wonder, does this mean we've seen the last of UK fighters going out and working with Al Heyman and trying to build their names in the US? There's guys like Anthony Joshua who are such big names and such global names now that they could probably do that. But for the level just a little bit down, your Bellews, your Billy Joe Saunderses, your Crollers, your Ricky Burnses, those type of names, are they going to want to be signing deals with Al Heyman and trying to fight in the US? I'm not so sure. I think they'll look at the examples laid down by Frampton, Selby, Degale. I think they'll look at the fact that these guys have come back to fight in the UK. I'm not sure if they've all got ongoing relations with Al Heyman, but certainly they're looking to come back to the UK markets and build their names again here. And I think that may stem any potential future tide of fighters looking to go out to the States. So that was the first thing that I took from it. I don't think it's a coincidence that the three big names Frank has recently signed are all the three fighters who actually stopped working with Matchroom to go out and work with Heyman, in my opinion. The second thing we take from this, and I think it's a fairly obvious comment, but an important comment nonetheless, is when these guys are coming back to the UK market, things have changed. Now, the first thing that's changed is Frank Warren has clearly got himself into a position, be it with BT Sports or his other business interests, where he can really get his checkbook out. These guys are not going to be cheap. James Degale is a fighter who, as we've said, has earned some money in the past. I'm sure Lee Selby has as too. I'm sure Carl Frampton has too. And Frank Warren's putting offers in front of these guys that are attractive. And he's doing that without an established, proven track record of BT Sports pay-per-view. So he's doing that presumably based on the security he now has with his relationship with BT Sports. So Frank Warren's obviously in a position where he has a lot of money to splash around and can put offers in front of these guys which are potentially lucrative. And I do think that's important. We're still yet to see what kind of opponents they're going to have. Clearly the fact that we're 5-6 weeks out, and clearly the fact that this is going to be at the Copper Box, would imply that we are not looking at mega matchups here. You know, we're not looking at, you know, a Selby versus a Gary Russell Jr. most likely. We're not looking at a James Degale in a unification fight against the Benavides or a Ramirez, because, you know, if Frank was looking to do that, presumably he'd have wanted a slightly bigger arena. I believe the Copper Box holds 6,000, and presumably also he'd want more than the 5 or 6 weeks to prepare and promote for such an event. So interesting to see what level of opponents. One thing that was suggested on the podcast last night by Paul is, I believe this is the same night as Guillermo Rigondeaux versus Vasil Lomachenko. And if that is the case, it'd be interesting to see how Frank Warren brands this and whether he goes down the pay-per-view route. You know, especially now he's working with these names like Degale, who's going to, be requiring very substantial paydays. But you know, there's always been the idea of a 2-part pay-per-view where you have your UK fighters going on till about midnight, and then you swap over and have a second card internationally, in this case Guillermo Rigondeaux versus Lomachenko. So I wonder if Frank will brand this as a pay-per-view event. I wonder if he'll try and make it available via the Sky box office button to people who don't typically subscribe to Box Nation and BT Sports. That would be very, very interesting. I believe if you are a Box Nation subscriber like myself, you'd still be able to watch these fights as per normal, but it may be a pay-per-view event to the non-Box Nation subscribers. So let's see how that plays out. We'll be interested to hear either way when or when not that's confirmed. But regardless of who the opponents are for Selby and Degale, we're in for a very, very, very good night's boxing here. You've got Lomachenko versus Rigondeaux. That's got to be the hardcore fight of the year. Then you've got Degale and Selby, two of Britain's best fighters in world title fights. And then down the cards, you've got some real blue chip prospects, some of the best prospects in British boxing and potentially world boxing. Daniel Dubois and Anthony Yard. And I'm sure Frank will add other fights. You know what Frank's like. You know the kind of fights he makes. I'm sure there'll be 2 or 3 50-50 trade fights, area fights, English title fights, British fights. I'm sure we'll get something interesting added to the bill to further tantalise those boxing taste buds. But yeah, Frank's getting his checkbook out, and very, very, very fair play to him for doing that. So that's the second notable point. The third point, and I think this is an important point, is the changing face of the Matchroom Eddie Hearn and Sky boxing business model. You know, I personally believe 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, if this situation had happened, I believe that Eddie Hearn would have gone out of his way to accommodate the return of fighters like Selby and Degale. He actually mentioned in an IFL TV interview, and he was very candid about the situation. It was recorded yesterday on IFL TV. Recommend you taking the time to check that out if you haven't done so already. But he was very candid about the fact that Degale and his team had approached him for a fight in the UK. They wanted to get out in December. And Eddie Hearn looked at his schedule, looked at the fact he already had David Haye versus Tony Bellew pay-per-view announced, and he simply couldn't find the gap to put on a fight of enough magnitude that would justify the pay demands of James Degale. One would presume the Lee Selby situation isn't radically different. So Eddie Hearn's been offered the opportunity to work with the likes of James Degale, and I think Eddie Hearn actually suggested in the interview it took him quite a while to get back to Degale because he couldn't think of a way to match him. And Degale obviously is going to be a difficult guy to match right now because a lot of the obvious fights are all out of the question because they're kind of wrapped up in this World Boxing Super Series. Certainly the big money pay-per-view fights like a Groves or a Eubank, those are not available. So I think there's a changing face to the Eddie Hearn business, and I think we've seen this for a while. We're seeing less and less and less of the regular Saturday night shows that are headlined by guys like James Degale, that are headlined by guys like Lee Selby. These days with Matchroom, I think you have the big pay-per-view bills with your Joshuas, your Bellews, your Brooks. I think you have your next-gen shows with your Coleys, your Buatsis, your Cheesemans, those sort of guys. And then you kind of have the Saturday night show in the middle. But for me, a lot of those are more your kind of fighters only known within the trade. Your Ricky Burns's, your McDonald's, those kind of guys I'm talking about. Your Scott Quiggs. What you're not getting anymore is your high-profile headline acts on a Saturday night. I don't think we'll see Dillian Whyte headlining too many more Saturday shows. I don't think we'll see Tony Bellew headlining too many more Saturday shows. I don't think we'll see guys like Chris Eubank Jr. or even a Degale if he re-signed with Matchroom. You know, I just don't think Eddie Hearn's business model is there anymore. I don't think he's looking to put on Saturday night shows with guys like James Degale headlining. For Eddie Hearn at the minute, it seems to be pay-per-view or a lesser product. That's my take on the situation. So, interesting that Eddie Hearn's priorities have changed. Interesting that, you know, he couldn't necessarily find something for a likes of a Degale. But to be honest, you know, some of that, and I kind of believe what Eddie was saying, some of that is just that things have moved on. You know, he's now got a huge pay-per-view event. You know, the hot boxing hardcore may turn their noses up at it, but Bellew Hay will be a massive, massive, massive hit at the box office. So that he's got stuff like that to organise. He's obviously got the big Joshua bandwagon, which is forever ongoing. And he hasn't got that spot for James Degale. And I kind of believed what he said. I don't believe this was a case that Eddie Hearn necessarily got into a bidding war with the Box Nation side and lost. I think it's possibly more a case that, you know, where he's at right now, there isn't a neat fit for a guy like James Degale. Now, there's some talk as to whether this deal that Degale signed is a fight-by-fight deal. If that is the case, then Degale may, you know, use this as a way of, you know, getting a run out prior to Christmas, and then we'll maybe review his options in the new year, and maybe he'll then, you know, have another conversation with Matchroom, have another conversation with Frank Warren. I'm unsure at this stage what level of commitment there is to this deal from both sides. You know, whether it's a two-fight deal, a one-fight deal, you know, a fight-by-fight deal, etc. So let's see how that all plays out. Potentially, you know, Degale could move back to the Sky side next year. It depends on the specifics of the arrangement in place. What I would say is, you know, Degale really is in a position to get himself in big fights. This Boxing Super Series has taken everyone's imagination, and in many ways Degale's unfortunately been left behind because he didn't or couldn't, because of injury, enter that tournament. But, you know, off the back of that, guys like Callum Smith, guys like George Groves, guys like Chris Eubank Jr. will all be developing a real boost to their profile, and the opportunities to match those guys up against James Degale is vast. If you know, we've got Eubank versus Groves coming up in the semi-finals. Even if let's say Groves beats Eubank, or let's say Eubank beats Groves, either of them, I still believe that the loser of that fight can jump straight into a pay-per-view headline fight against James Degale. I think their profiles will be so high as a result that it will be an opportunity for the loser and an opportunity for Degale to make some real cash. So, interesting times for boxing. You know, I think this is a very significant announcement. It's certainly going to lead to a very, very good fight night, and it's a major win for Frank Warren, BT Sports, Box Nation. So, my congratulations there, and I'm pleased to see it happening. Key questions: who are the opponents? Is it going to be pay-per-view? How many fights is the deal for? You know, is Degale going to use this for some Christmas money and then re-review his options next year? You know, hopefully some of those answers will become clear in the oncoming weeks. But it's a live time for boxing right now, and it's going to be a super strong run in and end of the year. Let me know your thoughts, guys. How significant is this announcement? Please leave any comments on any of the items I've discussed in this video. If you've enjoyed it, as always, please take the time to hit the thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, you haven't subscribed before, do hit that subscribe button. And if you are an existing subscriber, please hit the bell icon down here, or even down there, yes, to get notified of when I upload new videos to the channel. Just briefly, before I wrap this one up, let me just say, a video with a sort of final breakdown of Joshua versus Carlos Takam coming this evening. That will come Thursday mid-late evening. Friday evening Friday early evening, final prediction for Dillian Whyte versus Robert Helenius. Purposely waiting off from recording that till after the weigh-in, because I think the shape Helenius comes in at is going to be the deciding factor in terms of which way I'm going to go on that prediction. So Friday night, final breakdown and prediction for Helenius Whyte. Later evening Friday night, I'm probably going to do a special video discussing the Anthony Joshua weigh-in. A lot of rumours leading up to this fight. Joshua's going to come in very, very light indeed. And we're not going to know the answer to that till he steps in the scales. But I think that will be highly relevant. So we'll do the prediction and breakdown tonight. Without giving too much away, my prediction is going to be the same regardless of whether Joshua comes in at 16 stone or 17 stone. But I do think I'll do a second video on the weigh-in tomorrow evening. Because I think how the fight actually plays out is going to be fairly, you know, in terms of what we actually see in the ring. I'm not saying the result will change, but in terms of what we see in the ring, I think Joshua's weight is an interesting factor. Other than that, I'm going to sign off here. Like, subscribe, comment, give me a hit on Twitter at Boxing Gossip. As always, you can have me as a friend on Facebook using the link below. Cheers, everyone.